Hello and welcome to Fireside FileMaker, a podcast with John Mark Osborne and Michael Rocharde talking about everything FileMaker.
Welcome to Fireside FileMaker. My name is John Mark Osborne.
And I'm Michael Rocharde.
And we have a special podcast for you today. We have special guests, Rick Kalman and Robert Holsey. And if you're not familiar with who these gentlemen are, we're going to ask them their first question is, what's your title and role at Claris International? And let's start with you, Rick.
So thanks, John Mark, and thank you, Michael. My title is Director of Product Management, and my role is to manage at least part of the product management team on the FileMaker side, as well as help develop the roadmap and strategy for our future.
And you, Robert?
Yeah, thanks, guys. So my role here, I'm a senior product manager. I focus on the clients in the development environment. So I work primarily with FileMaker Pro as the developer and the consumer, as well as FileMaker Go and WebDirect.
Awesome. And why don't you guys tell us a little bit about your career and how you came to work at FileMaker/Claris? I'm not really sure. You're working with FileMaker, but now it's, if everybody doesn't know, it's now Claris International. And let's start with you, Robert, since Rick went first last time. Tell us a little bit about your career and how you came to work at Claris.
Sure. So basically, right out of high school, I started a position with our frontline support with FileMaker. So picking up the phone calls as people were struggling with the product. I worked at Frontline for, I think, like 6 to 8 months. I then moved to a tier 2 role. I don't remember exactly how long, but within a couple of years, I actually then made the move out to California. I'm originally from Baltimore, Maryland. And I worked as a tier 3 agent there for, I want to say, 6 or 7 years. And in that role, I really, tried to become the voice of the customer as much as I could. I was working with folks sort of at all ends of the spectrum. And so I felt like I had pretty decent insights on where people were struggling, what types of problems they were trying to overcome. I think that's in those meetings where Rick and I started working together when there was an opportunity on the FileMaker Go side to be a product manager. I figured what better way to be an even louder voice for the customer. So I started there, and then I've slowly been taking over more of the client space to where I am today, which is owning all 3 products.
Awesome. And you, Rick, can you start as far back as I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, you started out as a FileMaker developer, or might even gone farther back?
Yeah, so actually back in the mid to late 90s up until August of 2000, I was the lead webmaster at the Santa Clara County of Education, and I spent several years web enabling FileMaker databases using Lasso, if anyone remembers that, and then eventually got hired on at FileMaker in August of 2000. My very first day at work before I ever had a cube at FileMaker was at DevCon in Palm Desert, so that was a good start. And for the first 5 years at FileMaker, and I've been there 19 years now, I was the technical liaison for developer relations, so essentially the communication conduit between the company and our third-party developers, and from the developers back to the company. And then about 5 years in, I became a product manager. My first product was FileMaker Pro 8.5, when the web viewer saw the light of day. And then just various roles, manager and director. I've been a product manager for Pro Advanced, Go, Server, pretty much all of them except the cloud.
So I just have to ask a question. Which one of the two of you works harder?
Definitely Robert.
That must mean you're the boss, Rick. So, Rick, were you around? I think you must have been when FileMaker 7 came out with the big transition to the relationship graph?
Yes, I was.
Did it come as big a surprise to you as it did to all of us developers who then spent the next 6 months trying to get into grips with it?
Well, of course, I knew quite a bit in advance what was going on. Actually, when I started at the company back in 2000, we were already working on it, and it was a lot of work. But I contend, had we not done what we did in FileMaker 7, we would not be here today because it really breathed some life into the product, breaking through a lot of the limitations that we had on file size and having to have one file for each table and so on. But yeah, it was a pretty big undertaking.
It was certainly, and I would totally agree with you that it made a huge difference. I think it was so alien to all of us who'd been developing for as long as John and I had, to see that and just understand it and get to grips with it. Because I still think I mean, even after all these years, we still find ourselves occasionally out of context and go, oh boy.
Yeah, we didn't have the word context before that, did we?
No.
Right, exactly. I had a little story to relate. I remember back when FileMaker, before FileMaker 7 came out, I was teaching FileMaker employees how to use FileMaker. A lot of them were salespeople and inside salespeople, but one of the people came across my class was one of the developers. I don't remember his name, but after class, when everybody was gone, he got on the whiteboard and he said, "Does this make sense?" And he was drawing how the new relationship graph would work. And I didn't really realize what he was doing right then. I didn't understand. And I must say, when people first saw FileMaker 7, right out of the box, it was so different, such a paradigm shift from FileMaker 6 that, just like Michael's saying, it was a little confusing. But I think also Rick is right. It changed the way things work, and we wouldn't be here today if they hadn't done that.
I think that the power that the relationship graph opened up for us was pretty drastic, and it kills me to this day. And in us internally, even the engineers, we look at what you all in the community have been able to do with that tool set, and it absolutely blows us away. The everything being in one file obviously was a big step forward. Although there's plenty of people in the community that would argue a data separation model is the better way to go. But I think just from a core empowerment, that relationship graph is huge.
We actually did a podcast of one of the first podcasts that we did was on the data separation model, and we gave it a lot of discussion. And neither John nor I are remotely fans of the process. And we had an email from one of the listeners who said, "I've been thinking I need to use the data separation model for a long time, and now decided I'm fine ignoring it."
Yeah, I'll go a little bit farther. I would say, there's a lot of people who are involved in this decision, but if you change it to a separation model, I think that'd be a big mistake. It will take the ease of use out of FileMaker.
Yeah, definitely. Did Anchor Buoy, or Anchor Buoy as you pronounce it over here, come as a big surprise in terms of the way that people were managing the relationship graph?
I mean, I remember that, and I think it wasn't something that we initially anticipated, but it made a lot of sense, and I think that yeah, I mean, it was just a way of helping people to make some sense out of what they're seeing and a way to organize it. And I don't know, Robert, what's your opinion on Anchor Buoy? Like I said, it was a surprise, not in the sense of we're shocked. It's very typical for us, just as an aside, to put some new capability or feature in the product, and then come to a dev con, after it's been out in the market, and be completely blown away with what the developer community is actually doing with that feature, because we built it for one purpose, but of course, the combination of what you can do in FileMaker is quite profound, and a lot of times we're just blown away with what people are able to do with some of the basic, functionality that we give them.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is what that says to me is there's more room for us to improve. A big reason for going Anchor Buoy is, as Rick said, so you can better organize things and better understand context, which is fantastic. It's great that the community has sort of come together and have found a path forward. But I look at that as an opportunity for us to uh, sort of standardize, make it so that that's not something that the community has to learn. It's one of the barriers of entry as we bring in new developers and they're trying to get their mind around how to build complex systems. If they have to go off and start evaluating all these different approaches, that's going to slow them down. So I'm not saying there's not a place for it, but I think there is lessons that we can learn as we continue to evolve the product.
Yeah, I think as a developer who's been doing this since 1987, I've always felt that I want to push the envelope with whatever features you guys come up with and take it and see how far we can actually go with it. And I think this is one of the amazing things about FileMaker is it allows us to do that in ways that are completely and utterly unexpected.
I'd like to emphasize something Robert said, which is Anchor Buoy is giving Claris an opportunity to improve FileMaker. And I think we need to emphasize that they've been doing this a lot over the years. And I'll take one example, which is a big example, which is decluttering managed database. There are so many features that were introduced in the last 5 or so versions that were designed to eliminate fields, to eliminate table occurrences, relationships. We can take portal filtering as an example, hide objects, execute SQL. The list goes on and on. There's probably at least 10 items. And so when Robert says something like that, this is an opportunity, it's something you want to focus in on and know that this product development team is really listening to what has the pulse of the market in their hand. They know what's going on. You heard when they said that they, where they came from in their careers is both of them have development or technical backgrounds with the actual product. And it's very important that these two guys have a big role in where FileMaker is going.
Absolutely.
Yeah, to build off that, I joke with the team internally, that I want to knock out, all the FileMaker pet tricks that have been built up over the years. I want to get rid of those, and I don't actually mean that literally. As I said, you know, there's definitely a place for that, but I think when you see those kinds of things, it's calling out, it's showing that there's a need, and oftentimes, working with our engineering team, we can come up with better ways to achieve those needs. But it also kind of speaks to our overall, bringing power to everyone, bringing those things that, John, you've been in the community for so long, you've been a developer for so long, you've learned these amazing skills. We want to be able to capture that and bring that down to someone that has just picked up FileMaker for the first time. And so that's where we see our challenges and our opportunities that really excite us.
So, Robert, I hear you say then that you don't like pets.
That is not true, and my fiance would be very upset if it were. So,
Yeah, I got that too, Rick. So I'm going to ask a question I think a lot of people are interested because they've never been through this process. And we don't need exact details, but what I'm hoping to see or get an explanation from one of you gentlemen is what's the process that you guys go through from beginning to end? I mean, we're at a 1-year release cycle essentially on FileMaker versions. If you look at the past, I think 5 versions, how does it start? How do you decide what features go in there, and where does it go through? And how do you guys decide which features are going to make it and which ones aren't?
Wow, is that a big question, John Mark? I'd probably start it out and then let Robert go into more of the details. But it's it's harder now than it used to be. When I was a product manager, there was such a long list of things that we had not done yet, like script triggers or charting, that people even stopped asking for them. So it was really easy to to sort of start picking off those. But in the last several years, we've gone through a lot of work of looking out what's going on, trying to look into the future and see some of the larger trends in technology and take a trajectory strategically to build a roadmap to make sure that we're staying relevant and can continue to deliver a great product. So we sort of start out at that highest level and work our way into, so therefore, what do we do in the next release? And typically, at a yearly planning cycle, we're trying to determine some of this stuff, 18 months before it's going to ship. And so it's a bit tough to, to get that exactly right. And I'll hand it off to Robert for add some more color commentary into the mix about, how we get from, determining in any given release what's going to be there.
Yeah, I'll echo what Rick said. It's definitely gotten more difficult, even just since I've become a product manager. The market, the industry around us is moving at just a blistering speed. So, the days of, finding 30 new features to put on the back of a box and, try to convince someone to upgrade are just so far behind, not just us, but again, the industry as a whole. And so it's looking at trying to really predict the future of where, what types of problems are businesses going to be faced with that, that just aren't there yet. And what are the things that we're going to need to have in place? I hear a lot, I talk to customers about, well, why didn't you do this feature? Why didn't you do that feature? Someone asked me last year at DevCon, I think at the Fireside Chat, about, well, why don't you just, look at the community posts and sort by the most likes, and that just become your feature set. And while we do look at that, I mean, every one of those feature requests, whether it's through the product, which goes directly to Rick, or the ones that come through the community that I look at every day, those are definitely great sources of information. But I think if we did go down that path of just saying, oh, well, since we were talking about the relationships earlier, there's a lot of requests around managing relationships, searching and sorting, and different ways of getting at organization there. And yeah, we could go and spend engineering resources in solving those problems. But we look at it and say, okay, well, there's I think a higher level problem there that generally, and this goes back to what we were saying earlier about trying to remove some of that complexity. So if we were able to, as an example, completely separate your sort of base tables from what we refer to as query relationships. So the cases where I want to see all projects that are past due, as an example, where you're currently creating an additional table occurrence to drive that, UI element. If we could get rid of all of that clutter, I believe that starts changing the types of problems that you want solved. And so the types of feature requests start changing. And so it's really difficult, although a lot of fun, if I'm being honest, on our side, is as we're talking to customers about why they want a particular feature request, it's that why, continuing to ask, why do you need it? What are you trying to accomplish? And when I, again, look at the Anchor Buoy as an example, I see that as almost a workaround to the organizational and the contextual issues that you start running into as you get a larger and larger system to maintain. And so, as we dig into that why, it becomes clear that there's maybe a larger issue that we need to solve. And so that's when we're, especially in this stage, as we're planning the next couple of years and the releases that'll come alongside that. Those are the kinds of things that we're thinking about. The larger issues of we need to get developers into the system more quickly, showing taking that power that our top couple percent of our developer community currently has access to, and bringing that down to everyone. And so where does that, what kinds of solutions are there for those problems? That's not to say that feature requests, things like in 18, the addition of the file-based script steps is a great example of one that it's sort of been on our backlog for a long time. We had an opportunity where it sort of lined up with sort of our longer term visions. We had an engineer that was passionate about it, and so those things do fit in. And you've probably heard Clay at DevCon, if you've been there, talk about how oftentimes those sort of smaller little things make such a huge impact as, again, you guys get your hands on it and take it in directions that we didn't even conceive of. So yeah.
I think it's important to bring up or emphasize something you said at the beginning of what I think people are listening to this podcast really want to hear is what you guys do and how you do it, because we have no idea. We're not in this. But the thing I think that I like to emphasize is that you guys do listen to customer requests. You can't always put everything in there. I used to be the guy when I worked at Claris Technical Support who went through all of the product requests, the feature requests. And I would say that was a long time ago. That was 20 years ago. But at that time, I would say at least 90 to 95% of it was just technical support. That's why tech support went through it first. And so not everything's going to make it in there as a feature for a variety of reasons. But from my perspective, one of them was it's just because, hey, there's another feature that already does this. And I think you've got to understand that these guys also can see on a market also that, and I think this is the other thing that you said there, Robert, was that you guys can see a lot more than we can. You're looking at the entire industry and seeing what trends are coming, and that's stuff that not necessarily people are giving product suggestions know as much about it, but they're just as valid and important things to be to be considered for the next version.
Yeah, I think those are good points, John Mark. Just so you know, since June of 2002, way back when I was still a technical liaison, I participated in creating the new version of the feature request that you see in the help menu in the FileMaker Pro Advanced, or you can get to from our website. And every morning since that time, which is 17 years plus, it's been me reading those. And the reason I kept that from when I was a tech liaison to being a product manager and now the director of product management is the value of getting that direct feedback. I've got to tell you, there are over 26,100 feature requests in there now. And there's a few that stand out. Like I think probably the biggest request we've ever gotten is for FileMaker Go on Android, and we get things for sync. But the reality is the vast majority of those 26,000 requests are spread thinly throughout the entire product, right? And so it's really tough to go from there and say, therefore, we should do this. So luckily, and you talked about, both Robert and I having, some experience with the product prior to the roles we're in. We also happen to be product managers who have stuck around a long time, which isn't always necessarily the case for product managers. They can move on from gig to gig, company to company. But to have the long view so that you can stop looking at the next release and lift your head up and look at strategically what is the trajectory that we need to take the product to make sure that we're staying in step with the where things are heading is an advantage that takes a while to get at. And for myself, I've been the product manager or involved in every product since as a product manager since 8.5. And I think Robert by far is the one behind me that has the most. After that, maybe someone had 3 releases. And my contention is it makes a difference. The longer you do this, the more your view changes to go from tactical to strategic.
And that's exactly why we asked you guys, or asked Claris Corporation. Sorry, Claris, I'm going to do that. I still say script maker. That's why we asked Claris International to interview you two guys, because you have that perspective. You've been there so long, and is unusual. Usually people are hopping around to different companies, and we like the fact that you guys have stuck around, and we're hoping you stick around a lot longer.
Yeah, and the real trick there is to never become content, never think that you've arrived. I can remember maybe a decade ago arriving at work in the parking lot in the morning and sort of having this sense of, gosh, we won. There's no more competition. And then the very next thought is, where did everyone go? And so it was like a glee followed by, okay, where is everybody? And I think the kiss of death is to say, hey, we've got it nailed. We're paranoid. We're constantly looking at competition. We're trying to look around corners. I often like to say to my team that the greatest job in the world is a product manager, but it's either the best job in the world or it's horrifying. And there's nothing in between, right? Because there's just so much that you have to determine. It's not a science. It's more of an art as far as trying to look in a field where it's like dog years, right? Is 1 year in technology is a long, long time. When you're trying to look out at 2025 and saying, what are we going to be? You got to be a futurist. So for product managers, we are odd ducks in that we do not work in the same company as the rest of the companies in. We live in the future. And then the next closest people that work with us are engineers who are working on features that are going to be sort of a year out. And the rest of the company works in the present, selling what's there. So it's an interesting job. It's a unique job. It's sometimes hard to grasp product managers because our heads are in the future and not in the present as much. Of course, we still spend quite a bit of time, doing making sure that we're addressing in-market issues and that sort of thing. But for the most part, we're out there as futurists.
I think that's very interesting. And one of the things that John Mark and I have discovered in the process of doing these podcasts is that we're very much both old school. And we've been doing this for so long that we have learned all the ways that work really well in FileMaker. And what we've noticed is that there is a trend for the newer people who are coming into the FileMaker world to use technologies that they were expert at in their previous incarnation and not ever really get into the depths of what FileMaker can do without using those technologies, and which is somewhat of a bit of a concern for both of us. What do you think?
I don't know if I have a strong opinion on that. Robert may. It's interesting. I think that I'm not sure we could ever recapture the journey that the developers who were with us early on. If you think about that from Nutshell coming out of DOS, from those four Wang engineers and being ported to the Mac back in 1985, to when it was a flat file and repeating fields was the technique du jour, and then going relational and then cross-platform and then the relationship graph, and then adding on all of this extra functionality, external SQL data sources, and starting to come out of being a data island to introducing the REST API a few releases ago that opened us up to the rest of the world. That's a journey that we've all been on, who have been with this platform a long time. And coming at the end of that, I'm just not sure that you still have the same opportunity to discover sort of what at the very core is the essence of FileMaker. I mean, Robert, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm very much a, right tool for the right job. So if someone's coming in with a skill set and it works well for them, I don't have a problem with that necessarily. I will say though that repeating the same sort of theme, when people are doing that, I do question: is it because we didn't make it, easy enough to discover? Is it too cumbersome? Are we not matching, the right vocabulary so people aren't finding it because of those kinds of reasons? And so, without seeing specific examples, it's hard for me to say. But what I would want to do is dig in a little bit more and ask, why are they going that route versus using FileMaker? But I think the days, as sort of Rick was saying, of it being FileMaker sort of in a bubble, in an island, I think those are way behind us, and I think that's a good thing. I think where FileMaker can be a place to bring data together, or be an orchestrator, I think that's where we've got some real opportunities to win. Right tool for the right job, and would want to know a little bit more about the exact examples, without to give more detail.
Well, I can actually give you an example of that. I was working on a project in Colorado, and I was asked to go in and fix a solution that another developer there had been doing, and went in, and he had come from the SQL world, and he was using SQL over and over and over again. It was so disjointed and so inefficient. And I said to him, "Why are you doing this? Why aren't you just doing this with a relationship? Go to related record." And he goes, "Why? And it was like, oh my God. He's just missing the entire point of what FileMaker is."
And I'd argue exactly as I kind of theorized that that's a reflection of us not making it as approachable. If he came in, he understood his skills, he saw a path forward. So I'm not surprised that that's the path he took. But that's again an opportunity for us to make some strides in making those kinds of things more discoverable, making those things more straightforward. And if we're the concern with any product, you could have a product that cures cancer. If the customer can't see that and can't get to that, it ultimately doesn't matter. And so while FileMaker is incredibly powerful, and the depth is amazing, I think there's lots and lots of opportunity for us to help new developers tap into all of that power and flexibility.
Yeah, that's a good point. Go ahead, John.
Let's change gears here real quick and go back because this great things to talk about, but we want to get to a lot of other good stuff too. So I want to ask both of you guys, what's your favorite feature in FileMaker that you fought for?
Having been here the longest, I did think about that a bit, and well, it's hard to say the favorite picture, or excuse me, feature. I'll have to say that probably the first thing that comes to mind is I was a product manager that finally delivered script triggers. And in fact, I lost it the first time and I swore I'd never do it again. And then after I thought about it, went after the next time when we got those. And so that was, I think, that was a pretty big enhancement. I was also the product manager that was involved in completely reimagining the design surface, if you will, of the product. We had been forever. Our objects in FileMaker were 1-pixel primitives, and I was working with Heather Winkle at the time, and that was, that needed to be done in order to modernize our product, and that was through a series of getting away from the 69 pixel horizontal status area to the more modern status toolbar that gave you more than 8 characters to be able to see your layout name, having inspectors, and then finally the design surface, so that when someone new came to the platform, they wouldn't feel like, what is this Rolodex and what am I seeing, right? But then post that, I would say that, one of the things that I am most also proud of is being at the ground floor when we made the decision that we were going to go to the cloud and we weren't going to create our own data centers and we were going to leverage Amazon. And we've been on that road for a number of years. So while not one, and it's hard to choose one of them, I would say between those three, that's pretty good. How about you, Robert?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a tough question. I wouldn't say that, I had to fight for this. The team was, there was lots of discussion and debate on exactly how to tackle it. But by far, the feature I'm most excited about and happiest to work on has been the XML representation, which hasn't even fully been, our full vision isn't even out there yet. But when we started working on that, and you saw the first iterations of it in FileMaker 17 through the use of add-on tables, I think that the XML, building out that representation of the file is going to open up so many different options for us, and it's a big part of it's sort of the roadway, that we're paving for, as I was discussing earlier, taking those advanced tricks and those advanced capabilities that some of the top folks in the community can create and allowing them to turn those into add-on components that then brings it down so that anyone can leverage it. So XML by far is the thing that I'm most excited about.
That's interesting. What was something you guys fought for and just you couldn't get through or got rejected?
So
Good question. I'm not sure.
yeah,
Go ahead.
I don't love that framing, because I don't think that, at least in my experience since I've been here, that it's been an issue of PM fighting with engineering, as an example, about implementing a particular feature. We come in at a level of, here is a problem space, and we have the engineers help us come to a conclusion. So it never feels like we're at odds. Now, there's lots of things that I would say as a team, engineering, design, as an organization, we wanted to accomplish, and the pieces didn't fit. A great example of that, and we started talking about it at DevCon this year, is responsive layouts. And that wasn't a fight in that, engineering disagreed. It was about how we accomplished it and some of the roadblocks that we ran into it. And that's something that, me and the engineering team have been talking about for a number of years. And I can't wait to get sort of that kind of thing out into the market. It's just that the priorities and the technology and the hurdles that we had just weren't aligned in a way that we could get it to market. A very similar thing that I get questions about all the time is, actually, I'll give you two additional examples. One is in nested layouts, or being able to have, well, nested layouts, having like a layout that's your header navigation, that below it is another layout, so that you don't have to recreate that header over and over again. That's one where PM and engineering agree. We want to try to solve that problem space. We're just trying to figure out what the right solution for it is. And then the other one that I get almost daily is card window on WebDirect. Again, that was pure. That wasn't them disagreeing or that we had to fight for it. It just really comes down to priorities. And we knew with all the investment we're doing with cloud that was a bigger focus for us before bringing card window to WebDirect. So again, I wouldn't position it as us having to fight necessarily, as just us as a team working together and trying to figure out where the pieces fit.
Yeah, I think that's a very good answer, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, I was just going to piggyback on that, it also threw me because it sort of doesn't work that way here or at Apple. It's really a team sport, right? So it's like there's the way that we do this, there's not, unless you maybe don't know what you're doing, there's not an opportunity to bring something forward that then gets rejected, because we're at the sort of the center of the things that get brought forward. So there's plenty of things that will take longer than you would wish, or have some technical limitations. A lot of times we will behind closed doors, we're passionate about trying to figure out how to do stuff. I remember to this day when we were inventing the status toolbar, having a fight with engineering behind closed doors about should we or should we not have on the toolbar an icon that says reports. And product management thought, well, yes, we really need to make it more apparent that you can create a report in FileMaker. And engineering's pushback, and they ultimately won, was that their concern was if they have that button, people want to understand the relationship between layouts and reports. And every time they need a new report, they'll create new layouts, and that it would lead to trouble. And they fought that, and they won. But I think that's fairly minor, because we're just working together to make the best experience.
That's great to hear, because so many times in companies there's political posturing, I'll call it that, and somebody's got an axe to grind and they have an agenda that's different from everybody else, and that's where the thing tends to fall down. But I actually thought this was the answer you were going to give me. It was kind of a loaded question, but I apologize for that.
No problem, but I think you make us realize we're lucky to work in a company that works this way.
So I have a question for Robert based on something he said. He talked about responsive layouts, and I don't know what one is, and maybe a lot of viewers don't either.
Oh, great question. Yeah. So when we talk about responsive layouts, actually, let's take a step back and think about when you're designing a FileMaker layout today. Okay, so we really don't have the concept of being able to split things up into columns, such that you could have, let's say, a left-hand navigation that's always 150 pixels, but then you have two additional columns that, as you resize the window, they proportionally resize. So that makes designing layouts in FileMaker a little tricky. You're sort of working with one arm tied behind your back, comparative to if you're doing web development, where you can evenly distribute that as things resize. You can nest divs to give you better control of, as the user, whether they're on an iPad or an iPhone, as they move between devices, or as again they resize the window, they get a more tailored experience. Something that's very close to that, and you'll hear it sort of talked interchangeably sometimes, is reflow. So for example, let's say that I had that same example. Let's do 3 columns, and I've got a left-hand menu that's always going to be 150 pixels, and then 2 content areas that are supposed to be evenly distributed. That works really great up until a certain point. You shrink the window too small, or you open it up on an iPhone or other mobile device, and those 3 columns don't make a whole lot of sense. The simplest thing to do is just stack those columns. But again, if your first column is navigation, that probably doesn't make sense. And that's where you see oftentimes a website sort of changing things up and swapping from a dedicated area on the page to something like a hamburger menu. And so those are the kinds of experiences that we want to enable the developers to be able to, our developers to be able to create in the future. That'll also, we talked earlier in the podcast about sort of decluttering, which is a big, big goal for me and the team. And when you look at, from a layout standpoint, why there's so much clutter, a lot of that is because you're trying to create, layouts that are designed specifically for different form factors. And so while you may have one layout that's just to display your contact data in a detailed view, you end up actually having somewhere between 3 to 10, depending on how you want to dial in that experience per device. And so with responsive and reflow, that's going to considerably reduce the amount of layouts you would have to create individually.
And I want to ask, is object anchoring kind of the baby brother of this feature, the first stab at it, or completely unrelated?
No, I think it's a good way to think about it. We are still figuring out exactly, again, this is a sort of a tricky problem for us, especially to get it to work across all of our clients, iOS, Mac, Windows, web. They all pose slightly different problems for us, but the anchoring is sort of the most simplest example of this. And then when you start combining, let's say we had some container object that you could put objects in and it would have padding and things would automatically fit automatically inside of it. Then you can start, anchoring those, and you can start nesting those potentially to be able to create something much more complex. So think of it sort of as like a building block potentially.
And let's move on to the next question, which is, and you might want to answer this in terms of departments rather than specific people, because we already know from talking to you that you guys aren't the only ones who decide what features go into the next version of FileMaker. How does that kind of all play together? I think it's more about just how does the organism work at Claris.
This is it's a good question, John Mark. So essentially, we have a long-term roadmap and a strategic direction at a very high level that the company, on a pretty regular basis, at least yearly, every time we do business planning, we take a look at. But when we went from being essentially disparate products that work together to becoming a platform to then instituting the workplace innovation platform category. And we also take a look at what's the company about and our strategic direction, and we have a roadmap that supports that strategy. And then as we plan individual releases, it is related to that strategy and that roadmap, and then we'll put together initially what we call a marketing requirements document that is the highest level of here's what we're going to propose for the next release. Here are the reasons why we're doing this. Here are the market requirements, the customer requirements, and then that goes in front of essentially the leadership of this company, which includes the president, which of course is Brad Freitag now, the CEO, and all of the VPs. It essentially sets as a product council, and that is presented to them, and they give feedback. And then once that goes through, we move on to the product requirements document that goes into more detail about the specific features and functionality we're going to add. Once we get through, and that again goes to the execs, and then once we go through that, it goes on to engineering, and they set up dates and times and resources. That's sort of a more classic waterfall approach that's used, and now we're moving more and more to agile, which has the same feeders in the sense of the strategy of the company and the roadmap, but rather than trying to front load 18 months worth of work with Agile, you get exactly what it's much more agile. Things change, and you have backlogs of things that are based on strategy that then you're prioritizing and peeling off those most important things first. So we're sort of in flux right now, where we're moving more and more away. So rather than doing the councils with the president and the VPs, and of course other directors and from engineering, all the different departments, we're moving to something which essentially is a more regular product strategic forum with those same people there, but in more bite-sized amounts. We can talk and more agilely move, rather than, hey, once a year, guys, you're going to get this giant thing dropped on you, and you're going to have to determine if it's the right thing to do. We're moving in that direction. Robert, I don't know if you want to add any color commentary to that.
No, I think you summed it up perfectly.
So when I was developing, I forget how long ago, there used to be this thing called the kitchen. And you guys would invite a whole bunch of developers over to the Wedge in Santa Clara, California, Northern California, and you'd sit down for 2 or 3 days and show us what you were doing in FileMaker, and we got to comment. And I remember it so well because I remember I don't usually say a lot during those meetings, but one time Chris Krim was up there, and if you remember him, he kind of jumped up and down as an excitable guy. I loved the guy, and he was showing off conditional formatting. And I don't think I ever said anything other than this at any of them, because I was at least 2 or 3 of them. I said, well, where's the calculation engine? And he kind of, said, oh, we're not blah, blah, blah. I don't remember what he said, but he basically told me they weren't going to do it. All you had was the value option where you could choose and compare things. You couldn't put and then it shipped, and guess what? The calculation engine was in there. I was like, wow, I made a difference. I asked the right question. And I thought it was such a great way for you guys to get feedback early on. Would you ever start that up again, or is there problems with it, or is it just its day is done, or?
So, and I'll let Robert chime in as well. So, one, yes, we've done those. They're extremely valuable. We've had 2 and 3 day kitchens, and I always felt a bit bad because we have such loyal partners that people would come on their own dime from all over the country and sometimes out of country to participate in this. And obviously, we get a lot out of it, but also you wouldn't participate if you didn't. And we've gone more and more to more focused using GoToMeeting or WebEx and that sort of thing. Periodically, we'll do a physical one, but a lot less often. We also, because we have the ability to leverage, this technology, we will ad hoc do smaller groups focused on that all the time. And Robert's constantly doing those. I'll let him chime in on the rest of this.
Oh, did we lose Robert?
Robert?
It might have been a restroom
Yeah,
break. No
looks
worries.
like
Tell us a little bit about
it.
Claris Connect and how it's going to exist, how it's going to fold into the existing product development cycle. I believe that, and I won't even try to pronounce his name, I'll let you do it. The gentleman who was, running the stamp play, Giuliano, and I can't even try his last name, was going to be the product manager. Go for it again.
It's Jacobelli, I think.
Yep. I've heard people say Iacovelli, but I think you are actually correct, Michael. Yeah, so it is a separate product. As you've stated, we've gone from becoming or being FileMaker Inc. to being Claris. And of course, history-wise, people may be aware that our origins are in a company named Claris. And when we formed FileMaker Inc., we focused right on the FileMaker product line. And with the rebranding, we're taking that name again, and we're also adding additional products, just like Claris had back in the day. And so it's a separate product. with a separate team and run on a separate schedule. So it's not at the same release schedule as FileMaker. In fact, it will be coming out prior to the next release of the FileMaker platform, and it can, of course, work with FileMaker Cloud, and with FileMaker on premise, but it also isn't necessarily require FileMaker to work with it. We're one team. All the product managers are under Srini, who's the new VP of Product Management and Design. So we all work together, and of course, everything is interrelated. But they work on separate schedules, as well as FileMaker Cloud, which has its own release schedule. So we really don't have this once a year monolithic, release anymore. If you were at DevCon, you heard us announce that our next generation of FileMaker Cloud that doesn't require you to go to Amazon AWS, go through the marketplace, have an engagement with Amazon and also with FileMaker, but you just come to us, you're up and running really quick. That's coming out at the end of October. Then our intent is early next year that the first release of Claris Connect comes out, and it will be our first Claris branded product. And then we'll follow that with by FileMaker platform release. And then after that, I think you'll see us iterating much faster in the future, and not everything just sort of hitting once a year.
Do you think that Claris is going to be on more of an acquisition cycle now by buying products like StampPlay rather than developing it internally?
It's a potential, if we could find other acquisitions of the caliber of StampPlay, and it made sense to our long-term strategy, definitely it's something that we would look at. And we've done acquisitions in the past. Sometimes it's technology. People who remember CDML may have realized that it was something created by Blue World that was Lasso 1.1, and we acquired that technology. It's something that we'll look at as we broaden out our portfolio. We'll keep our eye open. We're definitely not closed to it by any stretch of the imagination. It's a perfectly legitimate way to sort of jump. It would have taken us years to build what StampPlay had already built, and the fact that we can go from introducing the Workplace Innovation Platform last August and talking about the integration category of that, and a year later come back and say we have a new workflow engine that'll integrate hundreds, if not thousands, of services out there without having to worry about endpoints and all of the complexity of APIs. You can just drag and drop. That would have been impossible for us to do in a year without stopping to do everything else. So when it makes sense, it makes sense, and it's an exciting new product for us to have.
Well, as somebody who has struggled with the API stuff, because I'm not a real programmer, I'm just pure FileMaker, and API stuff is over my head, and to be honest, I'm not terribly interested in it, but I'm terribly excited about what Claris Connect will be able to do.
Yeah, that's really FileMaker and now Claris's DNA. If you think about it, we're really trying to take very powerful capabilities and technologies and make them accessible to someone who's trying to solve a specific business problem, and they're probably not a computer programmer, they're not a DBA, they're not an IT person, they're not a classically trained person, but they are certainly adept at being able to put these things together. And you're trying to solve a problem. So do you really want to spend 35 hours trying to figure out how to connect FileMaker to a data source? Or do you just want to come into the product and say, I need to connect this to that, and boom, you do it. And then you take those extra 32 hours or 33 hours you have left over, and apply them to solving other problems. So I'm with you. I was the lead webmaster, and I came out of an era where if you were doing web pages, you were writing HTML. And then the WYSIWYG HTML editors came out of there. There was, Adobe had one, Claris had one, the Claris homepage. And there were purists that said, no, you've got to hand code or else you don't know what you're doing. But the people that went to the WYSIWYG HTML editor started cranking out web pages in orders of magnitude more productivity than the ones that were hand coding it. And out of that, we had an explosion of the internet economy. So I think FileMaker's that same way. Do you really want to futz around getting to the end that you're seeking, or do you want FileMaker to do the hard work so that you can get to that end rather than spending the time doing to get it? And I think that opening up the RESTful API to all of our developer community, rather than just the small percentage that really knows that, is a huge leap forward.
Yeah, I think it's important to note something about what Rick is saying that maybe is obvious to some people and not to others, is that Claris Connect is its own product without FileMaker, but it enhances FileMaker tremendously. So hopefully people who don't really understand Claris Connect yet will at least understand that it's going to make your FileMaker much better.
Yep, well said, John Mark. Thanks for that clarification.
Well, I think it's also going to do another thing, Rick, and the thing you said, who wants to spend 35 hours building an API? Well, the truth of the matter is the client doesn't want to pay for that. So if we can eliminate the cost of billing for that time that we're saving, not even if we're just saving the time to do something else, but by being able to do it quickly and easily, we can keep the development cost down for the client and deliver a solution faster and cheaper.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a symbiotic relationship there, because some have thought, well, that's billable hours I'm losing. It's like, no, you're spending 30 hours doing something that if you could do in 2, what would you do with those other 28 hours? And right. So you can get another client, or you can impress that client quicker. You're going to keep that client longer. We all know the lifetime value of a single client if you hold on to them, right? And it can be quite a bit. I mean, I've been a consultant as well, and it's uncanny, right? So the more you can deliver, the better relationship you have with them, the more things you can say yes to, and you don't have to pull your hair out and work over the weekend trying to make it happen. Then I think it floats everyone's boat.
Yep. Robert, are you still there? Because we've lost you for the moment.
That's too bad. Probably we've lost him for the rest of the interview, but Rick's doing a pretty good job. So I think you wanted to ask about another question about Claris Connect, about competitors.
Yeah, I mean, Zapier is, from what I understand, it does the same thing as Claris Connect. Am I correct in that? And was it just that it was too well established? The cost of buying it was too high, and Standplay was just a better deal?
Well, first of all, Zapier does similar things, but not exactly. So similar in the sense of making easy connections. If you're also aware of if this then that, it's similar as well. If this then that is literally what it says. So it's limited in the number of things that you can string together. And Zapier has more power. But there is even more power in Claris Connect than that for developers, especially. Now you don't need to do this, but you can extend out the capability. You can do things much closer to what you're used to doing with a combination of scripts, calculations, and logic, and do some very powerful things that you're just not going to get even from Zapier. Now, we were never considering acquiring something like Zapier. We would have more partnered with them. And again, the downside to that is that then the customer has to go to multiple, if they want to do integration and FileMaker, then they've got to, have an account and pay Zapier. They've got to, have an account with FileMaker. And if you're trying to do it with FileMaker or the Claris side, it's just easier to come with a one-stop shop. That's exactly, one of the reasons that we're doing our own cloud now as well, is so that we can control the onboarding experience. You're not using a different language. You don't have to have a relationship with another vendor, unless, of course, if you want that. And it's just much easier to get up and going and running.
I'm hoping that Robert's finally back. Are you there, Robert?
I'm hoping so too.
Yeah. So, and this is perfect because the next question is for you. So you talked a little bit about save as XML feature. I'd like you to talk about what it means today and what you can tell us about what it might mean for the future, because I'm really interested in this feature a tremendous amount.
Sure. Yeah. So we our grand vision for this is really, as I was talking about earlier, sort of introducing the portability that many in the community have tried to tackle in FileMaker today, and there's been some success there, but we believe there's a better approach. We started working on it, I want to say, with FileMaker 17. I can't remember exactly, but I know in 17 is where we introduced the add-on tables and our new starter apps. Many don't realize this, but when you launch FileMaker 17 and of course 18, in the Launch Center, when you under the Create tab, there's 6 starter apps. And those 6 starter apps actually do not exist on disk as FMP12 files. There's actually a folder that has a couple of sets of XML files. One is the core structure, and the other is actually a series of them, each language, all the strings in each of the languages. And so when you go into the Launch Center and you hit Create on one of those starter apps, behind the scenes, FileMaker is taking those 2 XML files and stitching them together to ultimately create your file. One immediate win there is in the localization case. Instead of us creating a version of that app for each of our languages, we essentially create that app once and then have our localization team put the strings in so that we can then, based off the region that the customer is in, create that file for them on the fly. Similarly, when you go through the portal setup in FileMaker 17 and 18, you may have noticed that there's a new option called new from table, I believe, or new from add-on table, and that brings up some UI. And in that, we've got 11 add-on tables, which again are not represented on disk in any other form than XML. And what that allows us to do is take that XML and actually inject it into your file. So we're bringing over the schema, the relationships, the layouts, everything that's necessary for you to create that relationship, store that data, and then present that to the user. And that was really us sort of proof of concept is not really the right word, because it was obviously a completely finished feature that we put into the product, but it sort of helped us validate where we want to take things. With FileMaker 18, we added the Save as XML option in the menu, as well as a script step. Part of that was us sort of completing the full representation of the file. In 17, we focused on the objects, the elements that we needed in order to create those specific starter apps, those specific add-ons. So things like, I think popovers were one thing that we didn't have the ability to serialize and deserialize as XML yet. But with 18, the goal is to get 100% fidelity, or as close to it as we can. That then starts opening up for a future where, again, the community, once they've created some awesome element, be able to turn that into an add-on and start sharing that either within their own org to reuse elements in the future, or better yet, start sharing that with the community through our marketplace, and really, again, taking that power and making it available to everybody.
I know one of the features that I created with the FileMaker 18 Save as XML feature was the ability to compare 2 files. And I just imported the 2 XML generated files from the old version and the new version, then compared them, and it would come up with a list showing you. So that's pretty cool stuff you can do with it now. It sounds to me like what you're saying is there's a possibility that you might be able to create an XML file that completely represents your FileMaker file and could possibly rebuild it.
That's exactly where we want to head. And so that helps us for things like validating that there's no corruption in a file. But the other thing that I'm really excited about that setting us up for is pushing updates to your file. Version management is a huge pain in the community right now that we hear loud and clear. One of our first steps was the data migration tool that we introduced, so that at least you didn't have to go through a manual import process, between your V1 and your V2 version. But we want to take that even farther and say, you've got your production version, you've got your changes that you need to push up to that, and XML will be the vehicle that allows us to do that.
Just to clarify that, it sounds very interesting. Are you saying that you'll be able to literally update the original file with an XML update, which would just contain the changes, or would it contain all of the XML for that entire file solution?
So the goal would be that you'd be able to save the copy, very similar to what you're doing today, where you save the V1 version, the V2 version, and you start looking at the differences, and then you could basically create out of that a installer file, for lack of a better term, that are those changes. Now, we still have work to do there. We're looking at how we do sort of replace, like I have this tab control that has some elements on it. I want to update that. Is that going to be a replace of that entire object? Part of this is also making sure that we've got unique identifiers for all objects across the app. So there is work that we're still fleshing out, but that's where we want to get to. Is we want to try to automate this experience as much as possible, and that's the XML is the road we're paving to get us there.
That's fascinating.
Are there any new features coming down the pipeline that you guys can actually talk about? Any favorite features of yours that you might just give us some insight? I understand if you can't say certain things, but it can't hurt to ask either, I guess.
I'll say from my side, there's definitely some blue sky ideas that we're exploring with the engineering team, and I don't think it would be beneficial for anyone to talk about those yet. But the more immediate stuff that I've been talking about, with the responsive layouts, the XML, I think those alone are the things that will drastically change how we build in FileMaker today. So much of building an app is building each piece individually. We all have our tricks and third-party tools that we use to try to reuse components as much as possible, but it's very difficult, and it's not something that a new FileMaker developer even has visibility to yet. And so when you look at add-ons, again, enabled by our XML, and then the sort of changes, that responsive layouts or the enhancements to the overall experience of the apps, I think those two things coming together are going to be game changing, again, as far as how and what types of apps we build on the platform.
Any comments on that, Rick?
No, other than there's no specific feature in the next release that we can really talk about at this point. Other than what I'll say is that we'll do another roadmap webinar probably in the November timeframe and talk more specifically about what's coming down the pike in the next release, and then beyond that, where we're heading. We've been doing that for the last several years, and I believe we'll continue that. And then, come around March time is when we typically do preview webinars, and we'll share all of the new features. This year at DevCon, we didn't even really do a product demo like we typically do, because we did a visionary keynote. And some of what we showed is definitely in the next release, but we didn't really call it out. So I don't want to steal any thunder from the marketing and sales side of the house. So I can't really talk about anything more specific than that.
How much influence does Apple have over the direction of FileMaker and specific features?
That's a fair question. Certainly, Apple doesn't dictate any of that stuff to us, and we're able to run as an independent organization. We work as closely with Apple as possibly can, and we certainly seek out their advice on the things that they're knowledgeable about. We have a great symbiotic relationship, and I think we have the best of both worlds. And other than that, I'm really not authorized to talk about anything specifically related to Apple or our relationship. It's it's a good one.
So our next question, and we may be getting into the realm of where you may not be able to answer things, but that's okay. We ask them and we hope for something, and and maybe we'll get what we want, maybe we won't. It's an interview. So now, so many, we talked a little bit about this before, but so many competitors separate the data and the interface. And why? I mean, FileMaker's always had them together, and I think that's for ease of use. Are there any other reasons why? Because I want to dispel this theory. This is my kind of one of my goals is that the separation of the interface and the data is a good idea. I think it's a bad idea, and I've talked about it quite a bit, written articles, and convinced a lot of people not to do it. Is there any other reason other than ease of use? I mean, because you can imagine working with the separated interface and data as it is right now, it's very difficult having to switch between the different files and put a field in here and then go back here and then do the interface. And they're small moves, but they take up time. And I've constantly told people, don't do it. Is there any other reason why FileMaker, from your perspective, either Robert or Rick, has everything in one file other than ease of use?
Not that I'm aware of. It's probably an historic artifact of how it was originally created. I think it does essentially lend itself to, the ease of use, sort of that, what is the secret sauce of FileMaker, right? It's all the things that it takes care of that you don't have to worry about. And so how it does that is being intimately aware of what's going on, right? And it's sort of, if you change the name of a field, we're going to take care of it for you. That kind of thing that, other people, other products don't offer, right? And so I think it's just part of what FileMaker is. We certainly get why there's especially for when you're talking about updating things, that you could update the interface, but the data is still there in the background, but there's still an interconnection that makes that difficult potentially. And I think that going forward, there'll be less of a need for that when we're able to infuse schema through XML and that sort of thing. But it probably is fundamentally about the ease of use. I don't know if there's anything else beyond that. That's more of a question you'd have to ask Clay if you get him on a podcast one of these days.
That would be awesome, wouldn't it? Now, the next question I have is about live database development. And what I mean by that is some developers will do work on a database that's already on server being hosted and people are currently using it. Others say, absolutely not. I would never do that, even to add one little tiny button or one script. I would go and take the whole database down, import the new features, put the new version up there, and then, having worked offline on it first. I've been doing live database development, not from scratch. I'm not suggesting that you put the database up there and define all the schema and that, but once a database has gone through the first revision, it's completed, people obviously are going to have new features, and it's a time saver for me to go into the live database and add a simple little report layout. And so what I'm asking is, and I know that, in the past, FileMaker has made live development with certain releases better and easier to do. Specifically back in, I think it was 3.0 v5, they added the ability to make certain changes in managed database, whereas you weren't even able to go into managed database before. And so they've obviously supported this, but I've gotten feedback from lots of people that live database development is not a good idea. And I just, wanted to get your viewpoint from a technical perspective, knowing the engine, what that means for FileMaker.
Robert, coming from tech support, you may have some insight onto this. I think a lot is going to depend on the nature of the app that's being deployed, how many people are simultaneously using it, what kind of things they are doing, what kind of things you're changing. Are you fiddling around with global fields or calcs, those kinds of things. So I think it's dependent. Robert, do you have any sage wisdom on that?
Yeah, so I mean, live development is something that it's part of what FileMaker is. I mean, we see it all the time, and we strive as a team to ensure that that works well. That said, do I blame someone who understands technology and understands that we have to send data back to a server to be committed, and if something on the network goes awry and packets don't come across perfectly, and we happen to have a bug, and three other things line up that maybe some file corruption could happen, that person is probably not being over paranoid because technology has those issues. Period. Nothing, nothing specific to FileMaker. But as a team, as what we strive for for that to be the case. Especially as we start moving into cloud. We fully expect people to be creating apps up on the cloud and be modifying them and not having to bring them back down to a local client. And you're seeing, at DevCon, we talked a lot about being, web first and web, having a big part of the future of the platform. And if you're doing development through that, that's all going to be live. So I think that's part of what makes FileMaker magical. But I do understand. I do understand the folks that have those concerns. I had heard it over the years when I was in support. But I think as we're doing more and more, as Rick mentioned, the being able to push schema changes, where we can have more of a production versus a development environment. I think we'll have better answers for those people that want to be absolutely positively sure that everything is locked down from things that are in production versus development. So I think we've got some good options coming for those folks.
Yeah, it's very good. I do a lot of live development, but I don't. If I have to go in, it has to be on the surface. In other words, if I have to go into the managed database or add new fields, I don't do it while everybody's working on it. That's when I go in at night and do it when everybody's gone home. But to be able to just go in and add a report or just add a new layout or add some buttons, I can't see any downside to being able to do that. And in fact, it's fabulous.
So one of the areas I think that needs the most improvement at this point for me is an overhaul of the managed database that includes the tables, the fields, and the relationships graphs. And specifically, I'd like to see folders, tabs, filters, and easier methods for locating table occurrences. What are your thoughts? Can you tell us anything about if that's even on your radar, or are there anything specific you can tell us? I'm looking for any kind of bone you can throw me.
Yeah, it's definitely on our radar. And as I sort of alluded to it earlier, looking at why you're asking for those things, and again, that comes down to when I look at a lot of systems, I see that there's lots and lots of fields that are there just to store a value so that it can be connect a relationship where you're really just trying to query data, or just store some information that's really not relevant to what that table is really tracking. You've got all your global fields in there, and so we're looking at, are there better ways to tackle those problems so that you don't have this unmanageable list of fields that you need to track. And so I'd rather tackle that problem first before we go in and start adding all of these other options. Again, that said, though, when we look at sort of the future of developing in FileMaker, I wouldn't say that we would invest heavily in managed database, that dialogue. What we were talking about earlier, we started taking sort of alternative approaches to how to manage fields as an example. And so it's more of sort of a reimagining about, okay, given sort of where we want to go, given our current sort of expectations from developers, both new and longtime developers, let's just take a step back and figure out what's the right approach to this problem. So I wouldn't say that we're going to go in and start building in a bunch of bells and whistles to manage database. I think we're looking at it at a little bit of a higher level.
I completely understand. The only thing that you've already got that I think falls a little bit short is when you're looking for a table occurrence and you type something and it will highlight that table occurrence. But the highlighting or the way it's emphasized is so difficult to see and spot. I've sometimes stared at the screen for 3 minutes trying to figure out where it is. Is it possible to have kind of a more of a dramatic highlighting or a outline?
I mean, sure, it's possible. I'd have to go back and talk with the team. I think that's great feedback. I hadn't heard that one specifically before, but tweaks like that, nothing. I don't want to sort of close the door on anything. As I was saying earlier, we're always looking for, low-hanging fruit, things that can make an impact. So while we might not go in and heavily invest in reworking the managed database dialogue, if there were usability issues that were coming to our attention like that, absolutely, we would look at tweaking them.
That's great.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Michael on that one. I've stared at the screen for 3 minutes looking for what was highlighted. It really is so difficult to see. At least I'm not sure about Windows because I develop on a Mac. It may be different, but you can't see it on, especially with a complicated relationship graph. It can be very difficult to see which one you highlighted.
Yeah, definitely.
Good feedback.
Now, I was going to ask about master layouts, but you already really covered it, and I think you called it nested layouts. So we're going to move on. I think Michael has a series of questions he wants to ask that he specifically wrote to ask you guys.
Right. So with the 1 year cycle, is that going to be indefinitely moving forward, or do you see a point in time where you might not release a new version every year, but maybe every 18 years or whatever? 18 months, I meant.
18 years, I don't think so, but the reality is, I think if anything, there's more of a chance we move faster than slower. And we get the we get the complexity of having to do a version update, especially with server. But the reality is, many of the features that we ship, even on a yearly basis, are done many, many, many months before we actually ship, and we're just sitting on that value. So, we're looking at ways of being able to drop additional functionality into the product whenever necessary. Robert, do you have anything else to say about that?
No, I think you summed it up well. I mean, we're focused on getting value out to all of you. I guess the only other thing I will say, because I've heard concerns even about when we went to yearly about it being too frequent and being difficult to keep your apps all updated and all your versions updated. So I do want to say that we understand that, we hear that, and as we pick up our pace and as we try to get value into the product more frequently, and we try to push people to be on the latest and greatest versions for stability and security reasons. We need to figure out how to solve some of those problems. So we've got some ideas, and we'll continue to work through those.
One of the things that is obviously a factor for a lot of developers is that with a new version every year, they've got to spend an enormous amount of time and energy, which is actually money because it's billable time they can't be using, just getting certified for each new version. Has that ever been factored into any kind of decision on this?
To be honest, we don't really look at certification as sort of the driving factor to slow down development. But there, excuse me, if anything, maybe we need to sort of think about certification in a different way. But that would sort of be like the tail wagging the dog, I think.
Right. And the other thing, obviously, nobody's writing books on FileMaker. There used to be a plethora of them, and I write books and publish them on the iTunes store, but nobody seems to be buying books. And with constant changes, nobody's got the time to write up and keep up to date with all the new versions. Have you noticed that?
Yes, I definitely have noticed that. I don't know. I think it's just the nature of how fast tech is moving these days.
Yeah, I think we're kind of moving to a more of a blog world than a book world.
Well, I think so too. What can you tell us about the move to push everything to the cloud? Because it's a little bit confusing for those of us. What exactly does this mean?
Essentially, it's one of those things. Like I said, our job as product managers is to look out and see what's going on out there in the world of technology, and it's just clear that that this is the direction in order to be even considered, especially by new customers, is they don't necessarily want to install a server or convince IT to do that. And public cloud has become a commodity. With elastic computing, we essentially have unlimited computing power and storage at our fingertips, and it enables some very powerful things for mobile and web deployments, to being able to access a lot of data and be able to do AI and machine learning on top of that, and all of those services are essentially coming from the cloud economy. And our intent is that FileMaker continues to live on into the future indefinitely, which means that we've got to keep an eye on that. We could have the greatest product in the world, but if no one wants to install, fat clients onto desktops and laptops, then you end up not having customers, right? So I think it's more to that. My excitement more for the cloud is not so much, and it's, I think, big enough as it is to help with the deployment, and making it just really easy to go up and running, is all of the things that you can tap into once you're in that environment, from things like microservices to Lambda functions, to integrations. And you can rent now the algorithms that Google and Microsoft and Amazon have spent millions and millions of dollars on sub pennies, to be able to leverage them into your product or platform. Ones that we could never hope to build or would take us a decade, they're just available. And so it's such a big, broad world out there, and that the cloud enables. It's compelling. And Robert, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
No, I think you summed it up well.
So here's a question. This is a loaded question. FM Live Code has now written and released a compiler which will turn any FileMaker solution into an Android application. I haven't looked at this, so I can't really talk intelligently about this, but since this has now been done, do you think this is something that FileMaker might do in the future, either by buying their technology or developing it internally?
We obviously can't make any comment on future things. The thing I can tell you is that having FileMaker run natively on Android devices is not something that is out of the question. We certainly understand, if you're not on an iOS device, you're probably on an Android device, and Apple certainly, isn't dictating to us. So I think it's within the realm of possibility, but certainly have nothing to. And we are aware of live code. I think we've talked to the guys just at places like DevCon and stuff, and kudos to them for pulling that off. Robert, anything else to add to that?
Nope. I mean, it's, as Rick said at the beginning, it's a top feature request. We understand how businesses run with, especially bring your own device, and the lack of control over what devices that they're bringing in, and as well as the use cases that are necessary. That WebDirect is a great answer for that in a lot of cases, but in situations where you need to tap into the capabilities of the hardware, that's where it's missing. So we're fully aware of it, and as Rick said, not something that's off the possibility.
One of the things that I've noticed, I don't know quite what you call it, but you have the ability in FileMaker to bring up guidelines for the different screen sizes and devices you're using, like the iPad and the iPhone and everything like that, which is fantastic. But there hasn't been any change to accommodate the larger sizes of the iPad Pro at 10.5 and the big one at 12.3. Is that something that has been overlooked, or just not? Where does it stand? Because it would be very helpful to have those extra guides.
Hmm. Yeah, this one's a tough one for me, because it so for sure is not being overlooked. I'm well aware of it, and it really comes down to we want to do it better. Like we could go in and start adding the stencils. It's, as you see devices coming out, from Apple every year. But even looking at using WebDirect on these different tablets and devices, like we would be constantly chasing that and updating those stencils. And ultimately, I don't know that the stencils are even the best approach to that problem. So we're well aware of the limitations we've got there at the moment. But just stay tuned. I think there's going to be a better way for us to approach that.
That's fantastic. Great. We talked briefly about card windows and about WebDirect. Is there a technical reason why that isn't possible as yet, or is it something that you guys are working on, or is it just not really that important?
So it's definitely important to us, and it wasn't a technical issue. It was more just I think I mentioned earlier, we had our team working on the cloud. When I took over for WebDirect, I started hearing a lot of concern from the community. Like, are you still investing in WebDirect? You haven't done any new features in it recently. What's going on? And the truth there is not that we weren't working on it or we weren't investing in WebDirect. It just wasn't in ways that were manifesting themselves as features. There was a lot of work that needed to be done as we marched towards the cloud, as an example. Card window is something that we're working on, though, and I think it will be a big win as far as not just parity with the clients, but the type of interactions that you can create with a web app and meeting your customers' expectations there.
Great. So my last question is about, we already have the ability to type a percentage in the relationship graph and zoom in and zoom out of layouts and screens. But there are many places where that ability doesn't exist. Calculation windows, inspectors, script windows. And for somebody who has getting older, as I am, and my eyesight is deteriorating, I sometimes have to peer really dramatically. Is there any possibility that zoom in functionality will be expand to different areas and perhaps be able to zoom in 25% increments or zoom out in 25% increments instead of 50?
Yeah, so for sure that's something that we've looked at. It just hasn't made it in quite yet. There's lots of, especially when we talk about the actual FileMaker interface, all of your dialogues, the Chrome. It's a little bit more tricky there, but again, that's one of those things that we've heard, from the community, whether it's through the actual community forum or in person. So the only thing I'll say there is well aware of it, and we're thinking about different approaches to solve that problem.
Perfect. Great. Thank
Hey
you.
guys, I have a hard stop right now, so I'm just letting you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's been fantastic talking to you.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
It was a lot of fun.
And we're done. So that's perfect timing, right? We thank you so much for coming, both of you.
And I'm Michael Rocharde.
This is John Mark Osborne. Thanks for coming to the Fireside FileMaker, and please put your comments below. We'd love to hear from you.
Yep, that's same from me. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye. You've been listening to Fireside FileMaker, a podcast with John Mark Osborne and Michael Rocharde. We'd love to hear what you think, so please email us at info@firesidefilemaker.com. That's info@firesidefilemaker.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.